Welcome, everyone. We'd like to give an awesome thanks to Netflix for arranging this conversation with Torquil Jones, the director of 14 Peaks. Nothing is impossible. How are you doing this afternoon? How are things going for you? How are you?
Hi, Brandon. Yeah, really good, thanks. And yeah, great to speak with you. It's the afternoon here. I'm mid filming on another film, but it's great to catch up and talk about 14 Peaks.
It's funny you mentioned that you're filming, and just to get back in a little bit your backstory as a filmmaker. I mean, you've done a lot of producing on stuff that is sports related, and then you're doing this amazing, I guess, sweeping profile at somebody that is, I mean, the pinnacle of, I guess we call it extreme sport. How did you develop this relationship with NIMS, and how did this come to be? And what did you think when you're like, wow, I'm getting this just treasure trove of mountaineering footage at my fingertips?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was I was very much in the right place at the right time, and was very lucky to be introduced to NIMS back in 2019 whilst he was undertaking Project Possible, and he was he'd done I think he'd done about half of the mountains, and he was back in the UK trying to raise more money to pay for the expedition because he'd run out of money. And we just we were introduced socially and just clicked, straight from the beginning. We started to talk about what he was doing and his ambitions, both for the project, and the fact that he was filming it as he went. And I think we were just very aligned straight away on what this film could become and what this documentary story could become. Um, and we just stayed in touch basically. And once he'd finished the project, he very kindly invited me down to his house in the south of England. And it's very surprising with Nims, but he lives in probably the most boring suburban town you can ever imagine, the flattest road. So I went to his house and started to look through some of the footage. And yeah, I mean, I was it was mixed really. I was kind of blown away by the scale of what he was doing. Obviously, he was filming in Nepal, Pakistan, China, Tibet. There was a huge scale to what he was doing. But then also that there was a huge challenge with the film and how we were going to pull the story together, which was most films in this genre, about certain expeditions or climbs are really about one thing. Normally they're about one summit or one ascent or one wall. So it's very challenging that he had 14 incredibly difficult mountains. When you treat them in isolation, they are the death zone mountains. They are incredibly difficult. People spend months and years just trying to climb one of these. So really, it was a challenge of, right, how can we tell the story of 14 across 90 to 100 minutes, and really, tell it in a way that is still engaging, that people still get caught up in the drama of each mountain, that we introduce each mountain, we detail the climb, we resolve each mountain in a satisfactory way that doesn't just feel like an endless montage of shots. And then I guess the kind of a more specific challenge for me was, yeah, because my background was very much in sports documentary and sports production. I'm very used to working with very dynamic sports. So I do a lot of work. Yeah, I've done a lot of work in soccer, in motor racing, in cricket, in rugby. So the footage is very fast moving. It's very visceral in that sense. It's very dynamic. You can create these kind of stories of drama and jeopardy very easily. Whereas with mountaineering, Nims had shot 100 hours of incredible footage, but when you treat those shots in isolation, a lot of them are wide shots with someone walking very, very slowly through shot. So that was really a challenge for me, was how can I take that experience of creating kind of fast-paced dramatic sequences um, through my sports background, and really try and tell the stories of the 14 mountains in a very exciting kind of fast-paced way that would work on a platform like Netflix.
You mentioned that looking for those pieces. Like, what are you looking for in a mountaineering journey? Like, are you looking for picks into the wall or slips, or you're going through this footage, Nims comes to you and is like, this is stuff that I'm looking for help with. You have a an editor team with you, or what is that process like, and what are those gems? Because when I think about the film itself, I remember this particular crevice shot. I think it was on Everest when he has the ladder and Everest, and I was like, what is that process like? And is there anything that we missed or something that you couldn't get in?
No, I mean, the process for me, I didn't have an editing team at all. I literally went through every second of footage myself, just because I just wanted to know that every stone had been unturned, and I personally had watched everything. I mean, it became very quickly apparent to me that the key to making the story work was going to be a variety of footage, because when Nims and his team were filming, they were obviously filming in the same way on every single mountain, pretty much, which was, they had a couple of small DSLR cameras, they had GoPro, they took a drone onto some of the mountains, and then they had kind of some additional filming support at base camp for certain sections of the project. So for me, it was really important to say, okay, well, if we're going to do, if we're going to do 14 mountains back to back, then they have to feel different, and they have to feel like they've got their own character. So for me, it was very much, right, can we tell the story of Kanchenjunga, the Kanchenjunga mountain, just through shots that you can directly link to the use of oxygen, for example? Whereas with K2, which was such an important mountain, was, right, how can we chuck the kitchen sink of that mountain just to make it feel as big and epic as possible? Whereas, the mountains in the third phase were more to do about politics of the region and trying to get the permits and that kind of thing. So for me, it was going for every second of footage, trying to collate the shots, both in a chronological sense, but also in a stylistic sense. And then an important phase of the production for me was going back to climbers that Nims had been with at the time, who weren't part of the expedition, but who were also filming, and then sourcing footage from them directly to supplement what Nims and his team had captured as well, which just gave more variety to the footage. It gave more sources, and it just filled in some of those holes that we were missing.
Obviously, a technical difficulty, as you explained, getting all this footage, but it's also a bit of a story puzzle too, which I found really impressive that it was pulled all together, and particularly this notion of the importance of the Nepalese Sherpa, and there's all these films and in the culture and what they mean, and there was a big story point about them getting they're just doing this space. Like, how much did you want to push that? Was that a combination of ideas with you and Nims? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was really important from the outset. I mean, I think it started with me, with Nims and I talking about really what his motivations for doing the project were, and I think Nims was still trying to work out in his head why he was doing it. But I think we boiled it down from a narrative perspective into three motivations, being the Nepali representation and uplifting the name of the Nepali climbers. It was the family aspect, particularly his relationship with his mum, who was very ill during the expedition. And then it was this idea of human endeavor and really pushing the kind of limits of what a human can do. And how that basically translated into how I structured the film was those three key motivations became the big kind of narrative arcs of the film, the thematic arcs, if you will. And Nepali representation, I think, was probably the most important. And I think the way that we tried to interweave that aspect of the story into the story of the 14 Mountains and Project Possible was through Nims's interaction with his team specifically. So he had a team of four, a kind of core team of four climbers with him, which was Mick David, Sherpa, Geljan Sherpa, Lakpadendi, and Gessman. And these guys are just incredible athletes and climbers in their own right. They are, and they have incredible backstories as well. So, I think the temptation from our point of view would be that we have such a strong central character in Nims. We could just make this about Nims and the 14 peaks. But I was really keen in as many scenes as possible during the 14 mountains to show him interacting with his team, to introduce the team early in the film, and then having those characters keep coming back into the story because they played an equally important role as he did. And I guess I was very aware from the start that these issues around the Sherpas and representation, they've been covered a lot in documentaries, and they've been covered very well as well. There's a film on Netflix at the moment called Sherpa, which is a fantastic film that was made 7 or 8 years ago. So I really didn't want to kind of just repeat what had been said before. So my approach really was to kind of try and tap into that subject, but through Nims specifically, because he's such a unique character in many ways. He has this Nepali upbringing and background, but because of his training in the special forces in the UK, he's very, very different to Nepali climbers you meet. He's an uber confident. He's got a massive ego, which these other guys don't have when you meet them. So he's kind of, he's got this unique balance to him. But he from the start said that he wanted to uplift the name of the Nepali climbers. He wanted to show that the Nepali climbers historically have been front and center of 8,000 meter mountain climbing. They haven't had the recognition, and Project Possible, this being an international expedition with his face front and center, and it being led by a Nepali climber who had that kind of ego and confidence to go on social media and say, right to the world, I'm going to do this, was kind of a unique entry point for me. And that was how I kind of wanted to tell that aspect of the story.
Mentioning Nim's confidence, his ego, his personality, there's a lot of intimacy in here as well, particularly with things that I guess he was willing to share with you. I love the stuff about the Gurkha background and the archival, the photos and the choices that you're able to make, and even bringing his brother in. Can you talk about like that interview process? Because that's a little beyond him sharing all these things with you. Like, hey, I have this cool process. I have this awesome project I'm doing. It makes me look so great. But yeah, here's my brother and here's my mom and all these things. Can you talk about putting that together in the film and navigating that, and also his feelings about it? Was he always so gung-ho through that part of the process?
Yeah, it was a big challenge because I think because of his military background and his special forces background, he's very, he's hard to crack. He's got a very strong kind of shield, Nims, and he has that. I think he has that attitude when you meet him in person, where he doesn't really like to get into the personal side of what he's doing. It's more about, this is the mission, this is the objective, this is what I'm doing. So I was very kind of aware from the beginning that we had to kind of get beneath the skin, and we had to, also I think that, I have no experience or background in mountaineering. I personally find mountaineering stories quite challenging to connect with emotionally, because I think the kind of characters that are mountaineers, they're very kind of self-obsessed, and most of the time they're doing it for themselves for a specific reason, and they're very strong personalities. And I find it personally quite hard to connect with people like that. So I was very aware with Nims that we had to kind of break down his character and really, for the audience, find reasons to like him, to fall in love with him, to really attach yourself to what he's doing, so that when you do have those moments of jeopardy with the rescues, or when he's in trouble, you're really going to care about him as a character and really want him to succeed. Because I think his underlining reasons for doing this are very honourable, very, very really good reasons. And he is, when you get to know him, he is just the nicest person you'll ever meet. He's such a, you know, he is this person that countless times, when someone is in trouble that he's never met in his life, he will risk his life to help them. That's the person that is underneath. And really, I was very aware that to get to that, we would need to go via Suchi, his wife. We would need to go via Kamal, his brother. We would need to go via the relationship with his mother to really try to get that personal side to him. And his brother Kamal, who was also in the Gurkhas, they're very, very different characters. They live about 5 minutes apart back in the UK. But Kamal is, very typical of that Gurkha background. He's incredibly humble, quiet. When you meet him, he calls you sir. It's that kind of, but he's tough as nails because of his Gurkha background. But he is the polar opposite to Nims. But Nims looks up to him like a father figure. So that relationship is very important for his story.
Yeah, that was just an amazing. I thought that really touching, especially the nuanced relationship between them and the things that he had to say. Considering that Nims did tons of footage and was on the mountain gathering everything, I noticed there's some holes though that you guys were able to fill. I thought that were really interesting with like the animation choice. What made you feel like that was the best way, or what was the approach with that when you listen and see what he has and figure out that, hey, we got to fill in these gaps a bit?
Yeah. Well, I basically when I started working with Nims, I basically went down to his house for 3 days, and I just sat with him in a kind of recording studio. So we weren't filming; it was just recording the audio, and we just talked for hours. I was just trying to coax the story of each mountain out of him to really kind of get an idea in my head what the chronology was and what the kind of peak dramatic moments were. And then he mentioned a couple of things during the project, which was one where he was on Nanga Parbat and he fell off his rope, and he fell about 100 meters and was very lucky to basically not fall into a crevasse. And then there was another occasion where he'd been off the oxygen for hours at high altitude, and he started developing cerebral edema. And he told this amazing story about seeing this Yeti monster and hallucinating and thinking this monster was running up the mountain to kill him. And I just thought, there's two stories that would be great to somehow get into the film. But I was very keen, especially with the fall, not to do it as, because there was the option of doing it as reconstruction. And we could have gone to the Alps, or we could have gone to a mountain in the Himalayas and done it. But I was just, I guess my worry was from an audience perspective, if an audience started to think, wow, if some of this is reconstructed, what is real and what is not? So I was very keen not to add reconstruction into, not to intercut it with the footage that Nims had captured. And then he told me this story about getting shot whilst he was in the special forces, and I was at his house and he showed me the butt of this gun with the bullet hole in that was, we're talking about 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters from killing him, being shot in the neck. So I just thought that was an incredible, I think that was a big moment in his life that really gave him this kind of, life or death kind of attitude of living on the edge and living in the moment, on the edge all the time. I think that was an important step in terms of his story. So we had 3 sequences that we didn't have any footage for, and I was keen not to go down the route of reconstruction. So animation just felt like a natural kind of thing for me, where if we had more than one sequence, so it didn't feel like we were just placing it in the film in isolation. And if we could match the style of the animation to the 3D mountain sequences that we were already building, so the aesthetic had a kind of consistent look, then I was really keen to include these scenes, just again because it would add variety visually to the story, but also it would just add some extra layers to Nims's kind of character as well.
Yeah, I thought it was incredibly well done and very suspenseful. Like, oh my God,
Yeah.
the shot and everything. That's just an amazing story. As you get to the end of making a film like this, I'd imagine there's different cuts, there's different looks. When you're working with such a figure like Nims, like what's that look like toward the end? Are you waiting to share with him? It's such an intimate part of his process, considering that he, shot so much of it, and this project possible means so much to him. What's the navigation of that final, getting that final cut with a figure like that?
To be honest, I've done a lot of projects where you have talent involved and the process becomes very complicated towards the end of the edit. This was very, very straightforward. The benefit of working with Nims from a creative perspective, I guess, from a filmmaking perspective, is he is constantly on expeditions. He's either up a mountain or he's in the Antarctic, or he's always moving around. So he's not one of those people that will want to sit in the edit suite or will want to watch numerous cuts and cuts and cuts. I didn't show him a cut of the film till very late. Once we'd gone through the process of doing the interviews and really kind of being aligned on narratively what the story was going to be, he was very hands off and he was traveling a lot, and I was kind of left really to make the film. And the edit process was very, very smooth. I sent him the film. He was in Nepal. He was in the Himalayas. I sent it to him on the Friday. I got a text message from a colleague of mine saying Nims has seen the film. He wants to have a call on Monday. So I kind of feared the worst. But no, he was great. Yeah, he didn't want anything removed. He didn't want anything changed. He was very, very easy to deal with in that sense.
So one of the things that was really the emotional center is, his mom, and then we reveals that she was sick, but also at the end that she had passed. And in the timeline of where you came on, and that was booming over the process of the film, what was that like for him? Did that, affect at all putting together the project? I mean, it's such a tragic thing to be dealing with. That I know maybe that, considering what you've said about him and his character, maybe he didn't really let that interfere, but that's a lot to share.
Yeah. No, it was incredibly challenging because I'm just trying to remember the chronology, but he completed the project, and obviously she was there at the end in the helicopter with him, which was a fantastic sequence that he captured. And then he came back to the UK. His basically, this was part of an original cut that didn't make it just because the film became too long. But his goal was basically because his mum was in Kathmandu getting treatment, and his father was about an hour's drive away in a different town. His dream was always to buy them a house in Kathmandu. And when he finished the project, he managed to raise the money to do it. And he was flying over to Kathmandu to basically bring them both to this house for the first time. And sadly, he found out that she'd passed away on the flight over there. That was only a couple of months after he'd finished the project. So the challenging thing, I guess, from my perspective, and it was very good of him to open up about it, was I was coming to this afterwards in terms of the interviews I did with him. So I was saying to him, right, we need to go back a year and you need to talk in the present tense about your mum is sick, and you need to talk in the present tense about how you're feeling at this particular moment halfway through the project, in relation to her, how you're worried about her, how you're thinking about giving up. But this, of course, was after she passed away. So that was emotionally, it was incredibly difficult for him to do that. And it took a lot of kind of, we had to build a strong relationship by that point to make that work. But he was able to go there. But I think he's a very smart guy, Nims, and I think he realized from very early on that if this this could have easily become a mountaineering film that has a very niche audience. But I think he had the intelligence, and he was very aware that if this was going to get onto a big platform like Netflix, if this was going to get a global screening that people from all countries around the world would connect with, and different audiences would connect with, and it would get to a different audience than a mountaineering audience. It would need to have these emotional layers to the story, and we would need to go there with things like his mother and his relationship with his mum. So he was open to going there, which was brilliant.
And I mean, for me, it really made the film. Honestly, it was
Yeah.
incredibly powerful. You mentioned a bit about mountaineering a lot over the our chat here. You get this footage, but did you research, or what was the process of really deconstructing the mountaineering film? As you mentioned, you wanted to do something different, you wanted to approach it different, and has there been any sort of um reception to your approach? Because I've seen a lot of those films myself, and I thought you did a masterful job with that.
Oh, thank you. No, I mean, my approach really was, obviously I watched all the mountain documentaries that have been made, all the films that have been made. I also tried to read quite a lot of books about mountaineering, but not necessarily modern mountaineering. I read quite a few about the first ascents of the 8,000ers back in the 50s. I mean, I was really trying to. My research was not really about the kind of facts or the technical side of mountaineering. It was really trying to get to the bottom of why people do it, because I think that was always going to be the first question people asked about NIMS was why. And I was very keen, as much as we could in the film, to not go down the route of technically explaining his routes or how he was scaling each mountain, because it was more about those bigger themes of why he was doing it, how it made him feel, what the satisfaction that it gave him. So it was really kind of, for example, when he climbs K2, which is, I guess, is the biggest moment of the film, I didn't want him to be talking about the route he was climbing or the challenges he was facing in that particular moment. I wanted him to be talking about the thing that gets him is when he's in these mountains, he's living in the moment. He's not thinking about social media or the future or the past. He's in a life and death situation, and his instinct kicks in, and that instinct makes him feel alive. And it was the same when I spoke to Reinhold Messner, who is arguably the greatest high altitude mountaineer in history, and he was talking about fear being the driver, and when you're at those heights and you're in that life and death situation, it's very much like meditating. Your body, kind of your spirit, elevates to another level. And I was very keen to go down those much bigger kind of universal themes that the audiences would connect with on an emotional level rather than a technical level. So for me, it was two things. It was that, trying to broaden it out to a bigger audience, and then I think equally as important was structuring and editing it in a way where it felt very fast paced. So it could have easily been a 3-hour film, this, or a series, but I think the strongest version of his story is matching his style of climbing, which is fast, powerful. It's really his character. So I wanted to create these kind of very dynamic, fast-paced sequences that felt exciting to watch.
And frankly, it was. Torquil, thank you so much for joining us. It really was a pleasure. The film is amazing. And I would love to give you the last word to say anything you like about 14 Peaks and your process and NIMS and what people should take away from the film.
Oh wow! No, it's been great to speak with you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I just feel very lucky to have met Nims. To be honest, his story is incredible. His life story is equally as incredible as the 14 Peaks. I know he's got many more projects that are even bigger in scale that he wants to do. And from the start, I just hoped that it would get onto a platform and be seen by enough people that really kind of engaged with him and the story and felt inspired by the story. And I think that's, it sounds a bit cheesy and a bit corny, but that is the takeaway for me from his story. Is, he was born in a very poor family in a poor country, and he's done incredible things. And and it's all through his self motivation. And he's an incredible person, and I really hope people feel inspired when they watch the film.
Well, I was, and I hope more people are inspired, just like you said. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for being here at Spring Showcase.